Hey everyone, Antonia Lujudice here from StayHungryBeFoolish.com, and today I'm so excited to be talking to Paul Smith. Paul has spent career researching what it takes to inspire and motivate a change in a human being. He's a keynote speaker, a corporate trainer, and the author of the book Lead with a Story. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here with us.
You're very welcome. It's good to be here.
So if you could tell us a little bit, Paul, what inspired you to write Lead with a Story, and maybe like the message behind what leading with a story means?
Yeah, I may be a slow learner, but I've been 20 years now with Procter & Gamble, and it took me the first 15 or so years to figure out that storytelling was an important skill to have if I wanted to be a leader. And I guess it just kind of occurred to me after, like I said, 10 or 15 years of watching the leaders that I admired the most and the ones that I wanted to be like when I grew up in the company and the ones I wanted to work for, that I wanted to be my boss. And I finally noticed that all of those people were really good storytellers. And so I thought back, well, if I want to be like them when I get older, I need to get good at that skill. But there wasn't a storytelling class in business school, and they didn't teach it to me when I came to the company, and there wasn't a whole lot out there to teach it to me. So I ended up setting about to learn about it myself, and I ended up interviewing probably 75 or 80 CEOs and executives all over the world to learn when are they telling stories and what kind of stories are they telling and what kind of success are they having with it. And I ended up thinking if I was this interested in this topic, other people might be too, and so I ended up making that into a book instead of just keeping it all to myself, I guess.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Thank you for that, because I truly believe that leading with a story does get results. So now at least we have something to go on. But if you could tell us, Paul, a little bit, what are the advantages of incorporating storytelling in a leadership role?
Yeah. So I guess if there ever was a day where you could just boss people around and get them to do it, those days are probably gone, right?
Right.
You can't just tell people to be more creative or be more innovative or start loving your job or get more inspired. You can't just tell people and order them to do those kind of things, right? But you can lead them there with a good story. And I guess as I was doing the research for the book, there are other books written on the topic. And after I had read them all, I determined that there were two things that were really missing. And one was that one of the main reasons why people don't tell more stories at work is they just don't have any good stories to tell. I mean, they just don't have, they're empty when it comes time to tell a story. And the second reason is, even if they did have a good story, they really don't know how to develop it into something that they could share. And so that's what I tried to do in the book, was one, give them a bunch of stories to fill their database of stories. There's 115 stories in the book, one for each of 20 or 21 different leadership challenges, 5 or 6 for each of those challenges. So they won't have an excuse anymore that, well, I just don't have any good stories to tell. Well, there's 100 of them right there. And secondly, how do you do it? What's the structure of a well-told story, and how do you get emotional elements into it and the element of surprise, and how should I start my stories and how should I end them? All of the nuts and bolts of how to craft a business story as opposed to a Harlequin romance or a movie. It's very different, and so all the how-to is in there as well.
Yeah, because like you said, there is a certain structure, right? If we want a good storytelling to have an impact on influencing someone, so in your book you actually give the full structure, like beginning, middle, and end, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And Paul, do you think you can share maybe a personal experience a little bit where maybe storytelling helped you to inspire others or get people on board with an idea or something that you had?
Yeah, sure. A few years ago, I was appointed to be in charge of this project that was supposed to be a 10 to 20 year long-term strategic planning process for the business unit that I worked in, which is kind of a daunting task because that's a long time in the future. And quite frankly, I was finding it difficult to recruit people to be on this team because a lot of people just question the usefulness of a 20-year long-term vision.
Right.
But even if they did, it's hard to feel rewarded on a project like that, because whatever you come up with won't happen during your working lifetime, right? People would rather work on a team that's got product in market today, and they'll see their market share go up or down. You know, it's more rewarding to work on a current business that's selling something. Okay. And I work in the paper business at Procter & Gamble, and so what I did with this, I got a few people together that agreed to at least listen to me for a few minutes, and I told them a story about another paper company just like us back 100 years ago in southwestern Finland. And this company started as a paper company and ended up growing into a company that acquired electronics and rubber making equipment. This was right when the time when communication was just starting. The telegraph and telephone were just getting invented back then, right? Mm-hmm. So before, they were just making paper, which was used for communication, letters and newspapers. Then they got into the equipment to make the stuff that goes into the telegraph and telephone. So they were still in the telecommunications business. And every few years, they would expand into a different space that was at least related to communications. And 100 years later, this company is still around, and everybody knows the company because they're in 140 countries around the world, and they're the second largest manufacturer in their industry, and it's Nokia Communication. Wow. And so they make all the cell phones that you see halfway around the world. And I tell them that because, you know, the message in it is, I'm not suggesting that we get into the cell phone business, but what I am suggesting is that we plan our growth. You know, otherwise we will end up, you know, staying the size of what Nokia would have stayed if they'd never changed. They would have been the biggest manufacturer of paper in Finland. You know, big deal. Right. But now they're a $140 billion company or something because they planned that growth. And so stories like that can help you get people excited about, you know, a new challenge.
Yeah, because you see, like, me just listening to the story, I was able to visualize now. So through a story, I think people can actually maybe see the visual of what a result can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? It's funny because I've spoken to many leaders, right? And they're very skeptical. One thing that I find, Paul, that keeps coming up is that they're skeptical because they still feel in their mind that storytelling is like treating their employees like children, you know? Yeah. So I don't know, what would you say would be maybe the most important factors in telling a corporate story in getting people engaged?
Yeah. So I think I could see that problem if the way leaders told their stories was in a very patronizing way. Like if they said, okay, boys and girls, gather around. It's time for stories. Okay, so once upon a time,
right.
That's the way they told their stories. Of course it would be insulting and childish, but that's not the way you should tell stories at work. In fact, at work, you shouldn't even tell people that you're going to tell them a story. You just tell it. So the way it should happen is very naturally and organic, and it would be like, you know, one of my employees comes to me with a problem, and they're like, I'm struggling with this problem. What should I do? And my response, instead of it being, okay, gather around, I'm going to tell you a story, it should be, well, you know, when I had your job 5 years ago, I ran into that same problem. Well, let me tell you what I did about it. And here's what I did. And it was an awful disaster, right? Now, Sally down the hall, when she had your job 5 years before that, she ran into the same problem. And here's what she did. And you tell them what she did. And, well, she's now the head of the department. So you can see one of these strategies worked and one of them didn't. Now you go figure out what you want to do. So that's the way storytelling should evolve. It should be very natural and organic, and it shouldn't be this big production about I'm going to tell a story. In fact, if you do it right, they won't even recognize that you're telling them a story. They'll just be listening and engaged, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that one, yeah. And if you could maybe give, see, one of the biggest challenges, okay, that usually many leaders out there have come to me today is, I'm sure there's many, but one of the biggest one is communication, and especially when it comes to announcing a change within an organization. That's huge. I think a lot of them just freeze up. Yeah. So maybe like as a sneak preview, if you can share maybe a little bit how storytelling can make this particular aspect a bit easier? Yeah.
So probably the best lesson about leading change that I've ever learned, I learned from two twin 6-year-old boys and from their dad who told me about them. And what he told me was that they of course rode the school bus to school every day, which can be scary for a 6-year-old, right? Because you know, it's all these strangers on the bus and you're away from mom and dad for the first time. But anyway, they were told that halfway through their first grade year that the place they would get on the bus at school to come home was going to change to a different place on campus. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that could be scary because they don't know where to go.
Right.
Well, coming up to the big day of the change, one of the little boys was obviously very nervous about the change, and the other little boy was not nervous about the change at all. And Dad figured out why, and it's because the new school bus pickup spot was right by one little boy's classroom. He could see it from his classroom window. But the other little boy, the new school pickup spot, was farther away and in the other direction. So it was more scary for him. And the night before the big change, that little boy wasn't sleeping. He was tossing and turning in his bed, and he got up and told his daddy he couldn't sleep. And so Dad got him out of bed, and he got his clothes on, and he said, okay, let's pretend it's tomorrow at school and it's time to go home. Okay, where do you walk when you go out the door? And so they walked out of his bedroom, and they turned left, and they walked down the hall, and they turned right, and so they walked through pretending that he was going to the school bus stop. And they did that 3 or 4 times for him to get used to doing it. And then he said, okay, is there anybody else in your class that is on the same school bus? And the kid said, yeah, Johnny B. Okay, you pretend I'm Johnny B and ask me if you can follow me to the school bus stop. And so he tried 2 or 3 times to get up the courage and figured out a way to do it that he was confident. So now I had a plan A and a plan B, and he was very confident, and he went to bed, slept through the night, and it was great. And so the lesson that I learned from these kids was that people, even kids and adults, are not really afraid of change. They're afraid of not being prepared for the change. Mm-hmm. And so once they get prepared for it, all the worry stops. And so I tend to share that story before I announce a big change to let people know, don't freak out about this change. You know, if you're going to freak out about something, freak out about your own preparedness, right? Which you don't need to freak out about because you're in charge of that. You're in control of that. As long as you get prepared for it, it'll be fine. But don't be daunted by this change that you don't know anything about, because you'll be fine as long as you prepare for it. And guess what? We're going to prepare you for it. All the training's going to be here. It'll work out fine. So.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that one. I think I would use that one too.
Yeah.
Now, that's a good. And if you could maybe just highlight a little, because you mentioned, I think you're going to, in the book, you talk about a few of these challenges the leader face in their day-to-day. Can you share a little bit what other kind of leadership challenges you talk in the book? So that,
Yeah, so I thought I would find only 5 or 6 main leadership challenges where leaders are using storytelling when I started doing these interviews.
Okay.
And I found much more than that. In fact, when I got to 21, my editor told me to stop. I can't fit any more in the book, right? So I'm convinced there are dozens and dozens of situations, but it's things like leading change, like setting a vision for the future, like making recommendations that really stick, like getting people to collaborate together better, getting them to be more creative and innovative, giving feedback to people in a way that will be received as a gift instead of, as a constructive criticism. So basically the difference is storytelling is not a management tool. So it's not a good tool for like making decisions or managing processes or machines or whatever, but it's a great tool for leading people. So it's a leadership tool, not a management tool. So just about anything that you would consider leadership of people, storytelling can help you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe it's just because even like when we were kids, we always loved to hear a good story. And correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but I think it really puts a person in a visual mode to be able to see that they can get from point A to point B. Like when you were talking about change, we're afraid of the unknown. We like to know how things are going to turn out ahead of time, right? And when we don't know that, we get afraid. And I think a good story makes them feel comforted that, if you're prepared for it, like you said, we can get there.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, you've always heard that there are 3 types of learners, right? The people that learn visually, people that learn by listening, and people that learn by doing. Somehow, storytelling works with all 3. And it's because of what you just said. So the people that are more visual learners, when you're telling the story, they're visualizing in their mind's eye the story like a movie happening in front of them, right? People that learn by listening, of course, listen to the story and learn from it. But the people that learn, they're called kinesthetic learners. They learn by doing and feeling. They learn from the emotional feelings they get from the stories. So stories work with all 3 types of learners, and really nothing else does. The people that learn by listening, if you're lecturing to them, that's great. But if you're a visual learner and you're getting lectured to, it doesn't work.
No.
Right? But a story connects with all three types of learners.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Anyway, I think you're working on a second book now, are you not? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if the first book is using stories to help you be more effective at work, the second one is using stories to help you be more effective at home. So it's not a business book at all. It's a book for parents to use to teach their kids wisdom and values and character and life lessons through stories, instead of just wagging your finger at them and saying, look both ways before you cross the street, or be kind to strangers, or all the advice that we give to kids that really just goes in one ear and out the other, because it's not delivered in a story that they can learn from. So there'll be another 100 stories in that book, but for a very different purpose, more personal purpose.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great one too. When do you think it's probably going to be out, that one?
Yeah, so I just started writing it, so it'll probably be fall of next year, so the fall of 2014.
Okay, and this one, Lead with a Story, Paul, can you tell us, because I know that many people are going to probably have questions on how can I get myself a copy? Do we still go through the same channels, Amazon?
Yeah, so it should be available in just about every bookstore that, most people buy their books. And it's available online as well, like the Amazons and the Barnes & Nobles. And it's in e-reader forms like Kindles and Nooks. And it's even in an audio version, I think. And it's also in a few different languages, too. So it's in English. Japanese just came out. It's in Korean, and I think Indonesia will have a version of it coming up soon as well.
Wow.
But I think you could get to all that from my website as well, which is leadwithastory.com. Mm-hmm. And so if anybody wants like an autographed copy or something, they can do that there as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for being here. I think this is really, really great just to have a refreshing mind on really hearing what it means to lead with a story.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.